If you have never lived in Africa, this story might sound strange to you. But for those who understand the deep complexities of family, wealth and envy, this is a heartbreaking reality. This tragic tale happened in Ghana years ago, where love, duty and betrayal clashed in a way that left scars too deep to heal. Ofosuwa and her husband, Mr. Quayson, were a hard-working couple blessed with 3 beautiful children. Their home was filled with laughter, peace, and love. Despite his personal responsibilities, Quayson never turned his back on his extended family. He ensured that his elder brother Odum and their relatives lacked nothing. But instead of gratitude, Odum harbored resentment. "Why should my younger brother be the one to shine while I struggle?" Odum often muttered bitterly. Ofosuwa had always supported her husband's generosity. She never stopped him from giving to his family, but no matter how she tried, she was never truly accepted. They whispered behind her back, saying she was the reason their brother didn't do more for them. "Your wife has bewitched you," Odum spat one evening, confronting Quayson. "Since you married her, you only see her and your children. What about us?" "Odum, I do my best for everyone," Quayson replied calmly. "You are my brother, my blood. Why do you speak like this?" But Odum was past reasoning. His envy grew like a disease, darkening his heart. He saw Quayson's kindness not as love, but as a reminder of his own failures. He wanted more respect, more power. "If the crab does not die, it will not stop crawling," he thought to himself. If Quayson was gone, the family's wealth and glory would belong to him. Consumed by jealousy, Odum sought the help of a dreaded fetish priest deep in the forest. The old man, with piercing red eyes, listened to Odum's request and smiled wickedly. "If you want your brother's place," the priest said, "you must be the one to take his life." Odum hesitated, but the priest chanted strange words, causing Quayson's image to appear in a mystical mirror. The sight of his younger brother, calm and unsuspecting, ignited his rage. "Take this knife," the priest ordered, handing him a dagger smeared with blood. "Strike him now, and his glory shall be yours." Odum's hands trembled. He had hated his brother, but standing before this eerie mirror, he hesitated. Memories of their childhood flashed through his mind. How Quayson once shielded him from bullies, how he shared his last meal when they were hungry. "Do it!" the priest barked, his voice thundering through the shrine. With tears in his eyes, Odum raised the dagger and with a trembling hand plunged it into the image of his brother in the mystical mirror. The fetish priest's eerie chants filled the dimly lit shrine, and the flames in the clay pot flickered violently. At that exact moment, miles away in their home, Quayson was sharing a meal with his wife and children. Laughter filled the room, but suddenly he clutched his chest, his face contorted in pain. "Ofosuwa, something has pierced my heart," he gasped, his breath coming in short, painful bursts. His spoon clattered to the floor, and his body trembled as sweat beaded on his forehead. Ofosuwa rushed to his side, her heart pounding. "What is it? Talk to me." I don't know," he whispered, gripping his chest tighter. "It feels like a blade inside me." Panic gripped the household as they rushed him to the hospital. Doctors ran tests, examined every possible cause, but found nothing. "He is perfectly healthy," one doctor said, shaking his head. "Yet, he is dying." For a month, Quayson lay bedridden, his body growing frail, his once lively eyes now dim with confusion and pain. His strength faded, and soon he could barely lift his hand to touch his wife's face. One fateful morning, Odum arrived at the house with some family elders. Their faces carried grave expressions. But beneath his concern, Oduum's heart was filled with something darker: satisfaction. "This is not an ordinary sickness," Oduum declared, glancing at Kaysen's weak form. "The hospital cannot help him. This is spiritual." Ofosua, exhausted and desperate, shook her head. "He needs care, not superstition." But the family elders agreed with Oduum. "We must take him to the shrine," one said. "The gods must speak." Kaysen, too weak to argue, nodded. If it will help," he whispered. With heavy hearts they carried him away, leaving Ofosua with a sinking feeling in her stomach. The same fetish priest who once helped Oduum stab Kaysen's spirit in the mirror now sat before them, his face twisted into a sinister smile. He pretended to consult the gods, his chants filling the dark shrine. Suddenly he gasped, his eyes wide in mock horror. "The gods have spoken," he announced. The family held their breath. "It is his wife," the priest continued, his voice deep and foreboding. "She is a witch. She has already killed him in the spirit world. No matter what we do, he will die." Gasps filled the room. The family turned to each other in disbelief. "I always knew something was wrong with that woman," an elder murmured. "She bewitched him with love, drained his wealth, and now she is feasting on his soul," another whispered, shaking his head. Oduum remained silent, his face masked with grief, though inside he was rejoicing. "Is there no way to undo it?" one of the family members asked. The priest shook his head solemnly. "When a witch claims her husband's spirit, his body only waits for death." Kaysen, weak and barely conscious, forced his lips to move. "Ofosua wouldn't—" His voice broke into a whisper. "She loves me." But no one listened. The days passed, and Kaysen's condition worsened. The accusations against Ofosua spread like wildfire. She was shunned, treated as a murderer before her husband had even passed. Then, on a cold, unforgiving night, Mr. Kaysen drew his last breath. Oduum stood among the mourning family, his head bowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. He had finally taken what he believed was his birthright. But as Ofosua sobbed into the earth, crying for her lost husband, Oduum felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The gods had been bribed, but could they ever truly be deceived? After Kaysen's death, Oduum's plans had worked perfectly. He stood among the mourners wearing a mask of grief, but inside he felt triumphant. He had taken what he believed was rightfully his, and no one suspected the truth. Yet Oduum knew he needed to erase all doubt. He needed a scapegoat. "It is Ofosua," he declared to the family elders. "She killed her husband. The gods revealed it." Gasps filled the room. The once loving family turned their backs on Ofosua in an instant. The murmurs began, whispers that grew into accusations, then into outright hatred. "She bewitched him," one of the aunts spat. "She drained his soul," another whispered. "The gods do not lie," the elders concluded. "A woman who kills her husband must face the consequences." Ofosua wept, her voice raw with pain. "I did nothing. I loved Kaysen with all my heart. He was my husband, the father of my children." But in those days, a woman's word meant nothing. Her cries fell on deaf ears. Society had already judged her. Her children, once surrounded by love, were now abandoned. The very family they called their own refused to care for them. No one fed them, no one comforted them. They became outcasts, suffering not for their own sins, but for the accusations against their mother. 2 weeks before Kaysen's burial, Oduum took things even further. "She will confess," he said coldly. Ofosua was locked in a dimly lit room, her only company being her own misery. She was given food once a day, just enough to keep her alive, just enough to weaken her spirit. "Admit what you did," Oduum demanded each time he visited. "I did nothing," she sobbed, clinging to the last shred of her dignity. "The ghost of Quason will not rest until you speak the truth," he barked. Days passed and still she held firm. Then came the night of terror. As part of their so-called tradition, the elders decreed that Ofosua must spend the night locked in the same room as her dead husband's body. "If she killed him," one elder explained, "his spirit will torment her until she confesses." The door was slammed shut, the key turned, and Ofosua was left alone, with the lifeless body of the man she had loved. The room was cold, the air heavy with the scent of death. In the dim candlelight, she could see Quason's face, still and ghostly pale. His body lay motionless, wrapped in the white funeral cloth. But in the silence, she swore she could hear him breathing. She pulled her knees to her chest, her body trembling. "Quason," she whispered, "why have they done this to me?" The wind howled outside, rattling the wooden shutters. The candle flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then, a creak. Her heart pounded. The body had not moved, but she felt something in the air, something watching her. Was it fear, or was it really Quason's ghost? Tears streamed down her face as she prayed, "Nyame, save me. I have done nothing wrong." Hours passed, but it felt like years. The room was suffocating, filled with a fear so thick it threatened to consume her. Every shift of the wind, every sound of the house settling, made her stomach twist in terror. But the worst part was the loneliness. No one was coming to save her. Her children, lost and abandoned, had no power to help. Her husband, who had once protected her, was now a lifeless shell beside her. And the world had turned against her. That night, Ofosua did not sleep, and when the sun finally rose, she was still curled in the corner, her eyes wide, her body shaking, her heart forever broken. The next morning, Odum and the family gathered outside the room where they had locked Ofosua with her dead husband's body. The whispers of the previous night's storm had settled, but an eerie stillness hung in the air. Odum unlocked the door, and as it creaked open, a foul stench of death mixed with despair rushed out. There she was, Ofosua, a shadow of herself. Her once bright eyes were empty, her lips dry and cracked, her body curled in the corner as though she had melted into the darkness. "Have you confessed?" one of the elders asked, his voice carrying both fear and authority. Ofosua slowly lifted her head. "I did not kill my husband," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I am innocent." The family exchanged glances. She was supposed to confess. That was the tradition, but instead she had endured the night with the dead. "She is truly a witch," one of the aunts hissed. "No ordinary woman could survive a night with a corpse without running mad." But Odum was not interested in whether she was guilty or not. He had already won. His brother was gone, and there was only one thing left to do: take what was now his. After the burial, Odum made his move. "This house, these cars, this company," he announced to the family, "all belong to me now." "But what about Ofosua and the children?" someone asked. "She is not his wife anymore," Odum sneered. "She killed him. She owns nothing." And just like that, Ofosua and her children were thrown out. No home, no money, no help. With nowhere to turn, she gathered what little she had and took her children back to her family's village. But life was cruel there too. Poverty clung to them like a curse. The children, once hopeful and bright, dropped out of school one by one. Hunger replaced their laughter, and struggle became their only companion. Meanwhile, Odum was thriving. He moved to Accra with his wife and children, driving his late brother's cars, living in his late brother's mansion, and running Kaysen's roofing sheet company as though it had always been his. He became rich, powerful, and feared. But wealth cannot silence the cries of the wronged. Every night, back in the village, Ofosuwa prepared for war, not with weapons, but with curses. She would take a bottle of schnapp, strip herself half naked, and walk barefoot to the Ford Junction at midnight. With tears in her eyes and pain in her voice, she lifted the bottle to the skies and called upon the gods. Ye Nyame, ye Abosom, spirits of the land, spirits of the river, spirits of the sky, hear me, she cried. She poured the schnapp onto the ground. The one who took my husband from me, the one who destroyed my home, the one who made my children suffer, may they know no peace. May they lose what they stole. May their own blood betray them. May they cry the same tears I have cried. Her voice echoed through the silent village. The wind howled, as if listening, and the gods, known to be slow but never blind, had begun to take notice. Ofosuwa sat outside their small mud house in the village, watching her children. Their eyes, once bright with hope, now carried the dullness of hardship. They were school dropouts, not because they lacked intelligence, but because poverty had slammed its heavy hands upon them. She could not bear it any more. As a mother, how could she watch her children waste away while the wealth their father had worked for was being enjoyed by another? With her last strength, she gathered her children and made the long journey to Accra. When they arrived at the grand mansion, the gates stood taller than their hopes. The house that once belonged to their father now belonged to the man who had destroyed their lives. Odium. A security guard blocked them. "What do you want here?" "We need to see Mr. Odum," Ofosuwa said, her voice firm, despite the shame. Minutes later, Odum appeared at the gate, dressed in fine clothing, a golden watch on his wrist. He looked at Ofosuwa and scoffed. "You dare come here?" he spat. "The murderer has no shame." Ofosuwa swallowed the lump in her throat. "Odum, I am not here to fight you. I am here for my children. They need school fees. They don't want their father's property, just the chance to go back to school." Odum laughed bitterly. "Your children!" He glanced at them, now kneeling in the dust, tears streaming down their faces. "Uncle, please," the eldest child sobbed. "We have nothing left. We don't need the house or the company. Just help us go back to school. That is all we ask." But Odum's face turned dark. "If you don't leave now, I will set dogs on you." The children's wails filled the compound. Ofosuwa looked at him, her heart breaking. "Odum, do you not fear the gods?" she whispered. "Do you not fear the cry of orphans?" Odum smirked. "The sky does not fall when the poor cry," he mocked. With no choice, Ofosuwa gathered her weeping children and turned away. As they walked back to the village, dust covering their tired feet, the youngest child asked, "Mama, why does Uncle hate us so much?" She wiped her tears. "My child, when the frog dies, the river is never full again. Your father is gone, and now our home has dried up, but the gods are watching. The road may be long, but justice never sleeps." With nothing left, Ofosuwa and her children found themselves stranded in Accra. They had come seeking help, but they had only found rejection and humiliation. Their last coins had been spent, and now they sat by the roadside, dust-covered and hungry, begging strangers for just enough money to return to their village. "Please, good people," Ofosua whispered, shame burning in her chest. "We only need money for transportation. My children have not eaten, but all we ask is for a way to go home." Some people ignored them, others whispered as they passed. But then a kind-hearted old woman stopped. "My daughter, what has brought you to this point?" she asked. Tears filled Ofosua's eyes. "Life has beaten us down," she murmured. The old woman sighed, dug into her cloth bag, and handed her some money. "Go in peace, my child. But remember, the curse of a wronged woman does not die with the wind. It waits like a shadow in the dark." With gratitude, Ofosua and her children finally returned to the village, broken but alive. Months passed, and in Accra, Odum continued his lavish life. He was now a powerful man, respected and feared. He had stolen his brother's legacy, crushed his widow, and abandoned his own blood. To him, the past was buried. But the gods do not sleep. One afternoon, his eldest son, a bright secondary school student, suddenly collapsed in the classroom. Panic spread as his teachers rushed him to the hospital. By the time they arrived, he was unconscious. The doctors fought to save him, but there was nothing they could do. He took his last breath without explanation. It was a death without reason, a death without cause. When the news reached Odum, his world shattered. He had built a bright future for his children. He had taken everything Quayson had and ensured his own family never lacked. Yet his son, the one he had loved so dearly, was gone in the blink of an eye. People murmured in fear. "The sins of a father," they whispered, "sometimes fall on the heads of his children." Grief consumed him, but the gods were not done. One night, as Odum lay in his grand mansion, sleep did not come easily. The weight of his son's death sat heavy on his chest. But exhaustion overtook him, and soon he drifted into a restless slumber. And then he saw it, a dark night. His gated house, standing tall and proud. And outside the gates, his brother, Quayson. But Quayson was not as he had been in life. His eyes were hollow, his face pale as the dead, and from them, tears of blood streamed down his cheeks. He lifted his hand and pointed. "My elder brother, why?" Quayson's voice was soft, yet it carried through the air like a haunting wind. "My elder brother, why?" His cries echoed in the night, growing louder, filling every corner of Odum's mind. "Odum, my elder brother, why?" The voice pierced his soul, rattled his bones, and he woke up, drenched in sweat, his breath ragged. He sat up, his heart racing. "Just a dream," he told himself. "Just a dream." But the Akan say, "If a child enters a room and sees a feather, he is not afraid. But if he sees a crab holding a knife, he trembles." Odum tried to ignore it, but deep inside, a whisper of fear had begun to creep in. 3 months after his terrifying dream, Odum tried to push the thoughts of his dead brother away. He had convinced himself that it was just a bad dream, nothing more. One warm afternoon, he stood in his lush garden, watering the flowers that lined his grand mansion. Life had returned to normal, or so he thought. But as he moved the watering can, he suddenly felt a sharp sting on his leg, like the bite of an insect. He frowned, scratching the spot absent-mindedly. The itch grew stronger. By nightfall, it was unbearable. His skin burned, and no amount of scratching relieved the discomfort. By morning, his leg had swollen so badly that he could barely walk. Panicked, his wife rushed him to the hospital. The doctor examined his leg with a grim expression. "Mr. Odium, this is serious. You have a severe bacterial infection, either cellulitis, osteomyelitis, or gangrene. The infection is spreading fast. We have no choice but to amputate the leg to save your life." "Amputate?" Odum recoiled in horror. "Never!" he barked. "I will not lose my leg!" But the infection had no mercy. Day by day the leg grew worse. The skin turned black, then green, then peeled away in rotting layers. The pain was unbearable, a constant agony that no medicine could soothe. Still, he refused the amputation. Then the real horror began. One morning, as he lay in bed, he scratched an itch on his arm. The skin broke apart like wet paper, leaving behind a raw, festering wound. Another scratch, another wound. The infection had spread beyond his leg. His entire body was under siege. Every touch, every scratch, every movement led to more decaying flesh. The stench of rotting meat filled the air. His once glorious home became a prison of suffering. His wife did all she could. She took him to the best doctors, but none could explain what was happening. Every treatment failed. Every attempt to heal him was met with more decay. He was rotting, alive. No one could stay near him for long. Servants quit. Visitors stopped coming. Even his wife, despite her efforts, could only bear so much. The Ananse say, "If you commit evil, evil will follow you in return." And now Odum was reaping the full harvest of his sins. The wealth he had stolen could not save him. The house he had taken could not shelter him from his own decay. His brother's ghost no longer needed to haunt his dreams. His punishment had come in waking life. And the gods, slow but just, were watching. Odum had once been a man of wealth, power, and control. But now he was nothing more than a prisoner of his own body, a rotting corpse waiting for death. Yet death refused to take him. He lay in his grand mansion, abandoned by friends, shunned by visitors, and feared by even his own household. His body was decaying, the smell unbearable, his skin peeling away like the bark of a dying tree. Every night he closed his eyes, hoping to escape the torment, but in the darkness of his dreams, his brother appeared. "My elder brother, why? Why did you do this to me? Why did you betray me?" The voice was deafening, echoing in his ears, shaking his soul. Odum would cry and beg, his voice filled with anguish. "Brother, forgive me. Forgive me, Quason. I was blinded by envy. I was foolish. Please, let me go." His wife often saw him talking to someone in the empty room, his eyes wide with terror, his body trembling. But when she looked around, there was no one there. Realizing that this was beyond human understanding, she decided to take him back to the village. Upon reaching the village, Odum made a desperate request. "Call Ofosuwa," he croaked. "I must speak with her before I leave this world." The family, though confused, obeyed his wish. A week later, Ofosuwa and her children arrived. The moment she stepped into the room, Odum's decayed eyes filled with shame. For years he had cast her and her children into the wilderness of suffering, stealing from them everything they had. And yet, here she stood, stronger than ever, still dignified despite all she had endured. Tears rolled down Odum's disfigured face. "Ofosuwa," he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak, "I have sinned against you. I have sinned against your children, and I have sinned against my own blood." The family members gasped in shock as he spoke his truth. "I killed my brother," he confessed. "I envied him. I wanted his life, his success, his family. So I went to a fetish priest and took his life through dark means. Then I drove you and your children away and took everything that was his. I told lies about you. I made the world believe you were a witch when you were innocent." Ofosua's legs grew weak beneath her, and she held on to her eldest son for support. The elders murmured amongst themselves, horrified. "How could you do such evil to your own blood?" one of the uncles demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Oduum sobbed, "The gods have punished me. I am dead, yet I cannot die. I have been rotting in my own flesh for months. Every night Quason haunts me. He will not let me rest." He turned to Ofosua, his voice desperate. "Please, forgive me. I know I do not deserve it. But before I leave this world, I must right my wrongs." The family turned to Ofosua. Would she forgive him after all he had done? With tears in her eyes, she spoke softly but firmly. "Odum, you took everything from me. You stole my husband, my home, and the future of my children. You threw us into the streets like we were nothing, and yet the gods have shown that no evil goes unpunished." She took a deep breath. "I leave your fate to the gods. If they wish for you to suffer, then so be it. But I will not carry hatred in my heart. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine and my children's." Odum wept like a child. "Thank you, Ofosua. Thank you." He then turned to the family. "Everything I stole, the house, the business, the lands, they do not belong to me. They belong to Ofosua and her children. Give it all back to them." And so, with his final strength, Oduum signed away everything, returning what he had stolen. That very night, he breathed his last. The Ananse, "If you sit under a palm tree that does not belong to you, and you shake it too hard, the nuts will fall on your head." Oduum had shaken the tree of life too hard, and now it had crushed him. Ofosua and her children returned to Accra, reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. The home that had once cast them out now welcomed them back. The business that had been stolen now flourished under the rightful hands of Quason's children. Justice had been served, not by man, but by the gods who never sleep. Where are we taking the world? What at all do we need? When we kill someone for their wealth, what do we truly gain? If the whole world's mansions were given to you, you could still only sleep in one room at a time. If you owned thousands of cars, you could only drive one at a time. So why the hatred? Why the envy? Why the jealousy? Why do we kill one another for vanity? Why do we destroy our own blood just to sit in a seat that we will eventually leave behind? No matter how much power we hold, no matter how much wealth we accumulate, one truth remains: we are not immortal. Today or tomorrow, we will all leave this earth with nothing but our deeds, whether good or evil. So, let love lead. Let us celebrate one another instead of tearing each other down. Let us build, not destroy. Let us support, not betray. Because in the end, greed will consume the greedy, but love will always endure. If you enjoyed this story, comment, like and share, and subscribe to Ananse Web of Tales for more captivating stories like this. And let us know where you are watching from.